My name is Madeline Carter. I am 33 years old, and the night my boyfriend's billionaire father called me street trash in a borrowed dress, across a dining table of 23 guests, was the night my world shattered, and then rebuilt itself in fire. The chandeliers dripped crystal light above us, the table stretched longer than a runway, and every eye turned toward me when his words cut the silence. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they could hear it. Forks froze. Wine glasses hovered. My boyfriend, Daniel, shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Nothing at all. If you're watching this, drop a comment, hit like and subscribe, because what I'm about to confess isn't just dinner gossip. It's a war story, one fought in silk dresses and champagne glasses, where the wounds are invisible but lethal. Across from me sat Alexander Holt, Daniel's father, a man worth billions who wore his cruelty like a tailored suit. His smirk was sharper than any blade, and in that moment, I realized I was prey at his table. But predators forget. Sometimes prey has teeth. The servers stood frozen along the walls, trained not to react but betraying themselves with wide eyes. One guest stifled a cough. Another shifted his chair. The weight of 23 strangers' judgment pressed down on me. I could have sunk into shame, let the humiliation consume me. But something inside me, something forged from every time I'd been told I wasn't enough, rose instead. I smiled. Fully. Deliberately. Because Alexander Holt didn't know it yet, but the empire he'd built on power and intimidation was about to tremble. The silence at that table was suffocating. 23 guests, each of them dressed in wealth and dripping with false politeness, sat frozen like statues. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, but no one dared lift them. Alexander Holt leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into satisfaction. He wanted me to crumble, to sink beneath the weight of his insult. But I refused. Street trash. I repeated softly, my smile never faltering. Funny. I thought real trash was hidden behind gated estates, not seated in front of me. A ripple of shock spread around the table. Someone gasped. Someone else choked on their wine. Daniel's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. He reached for my hand under the table, squeezing hard, whispering, "Madeline, please." But I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Because in that moment I wasn't just defending myself. I was reclaiming every piece of dignity men like Alexander had tried to strip from women like me. Flashbacks hit me in waves. Working double shifts as a waitress, smiling through sleazy comments. Wearing second-hand clothes to college interviews, praying no one noticed. Every sneer, every rejection, every time someone told me I wasn't good enough. Alexander had spoken aloud what the world had always whispered. But tonight I was done being quiet. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Careful," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "This table isn't your stage." I tilted my head. "Isn't it? Seems to me the whole room just heard you expose yourself. You didn't humiliate me, you revealed yourself." The guest shifted uneasily. These were CEOs, politicians, board members, the elite Alexander thought he controlled. But now their eyes flicked between us, watching the unthinkable unfold. And I realized something. They weren't disgusted with me. They were fascinated. My pulse slowed. My fear turned into fuel. I could feel the balance of power teetering inch by inch, and I knew, if I leaned into this moment, I could tip the entire empire he lorded over. I straightened my shoulders, the silk of my borrowed dress shimmering beneath the chandelier. And I whispered just loud enough for every guest to hear. "Empires don't fall with shouts. They fall with whispers." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment no one breathed. 23 guests, men and women worth fortunes, accustomed to power plays and scandal, sat riveted. Alexander's jaw tightened. His fingers drummed against the tablecloth, the only sound in that cavernous dining hall. Daniel's grip on my hand grew desperate. "Madeline," he hissed under his breath, "please don't do this." But it was already done. I looked around the table, forcing myself to meet their eyes one by one. A senator's wife, lips painted blood red, gave me the faintest nod. A venture capitalist, knuckles white on his glass, couldn't stop staring. They were watching history unfold, and I wasn't about to back down. Because I had lived in shadows long enough. A memory hit me sharp and cruel. I was 19, standing in line outside a scholarship interview, wearing a thrift store blazer 2 sizes too big. I had overheard another candidate whisper, "She looks like she doesn't belong." The same words repackaged tonight as street trash. And yet here I was, seated at the billionaire's table, refusing to bow. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes cold as winter steel. "You think one clever remark erases who you are? People like you are tolerated, not welcomed. Remember that." I smiled thinly. "Funny. Because it looks like I'm the only one at this table willing to tell the truth." Gasps again. A few whispers. I could feel the tremor in the air, the ripple of unease spreading. This wasn't humiliation anymore. It was war. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Dad, enough," he said, his tone sharp, protective at last. But Alexander ignored him, his focus locked entirely on me. He wanted to break me. To prove that money, power, and intimidation could silence anyone. But I had been silenced before. And tonight I would not swallow another word. "Be careful, Alexander," I said, leaning forward, my voice steady, calm. Because the higher the empire, the harder it collapses when someone finally whispers the truth. His eyes flickered just for a second. The tiniest crack in his armor. And in that crack I saw something that made my pulse steady, my spine straighten. Fear. The crack was fleeting, but I saw it. And once you see fear in a man who believes he is untouchable, you never forget it. Alexander masked it quickly, sipping his wine as though nothing had passed. But the tremor in his hand betrayed him. I held on to that moment like a lifeline. Daniel leaned toward me, whispering through clenched teeth, "Please just let it go. You don't know what he's capable of." I turned my head slowly, meeting his eyes. My voice was soft but sharp enough to cut. "And you don't know what I'm capable of." Daniel recoiled as though I'd struck him. His silence, his failure to defend me when I needed him most, cut deeper than his father's words. For the first time that evening, I realized I wasn't just fighting Alexander. I was fighting Daniel's silence too. Flashbacks cascaded through me. The nights I studied by candlelight because bills hadn't been paid. The jobs I took, cleaning offices past midnight just to scrape through rent. The times I told myself one day they'll respect me. And here I was, mocked in silk under a chandelier, still told I didn't belong. Except now I understood. Belonging wasn't given. It was taken. "Enough," Alexander said at last, his voice cold, commanding. "This is my table. You will not disgrace it further." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Disgrace it? You've already done that for me." The words spread like fire. A few guests tried to hide their smirks behind crystal glasses. Others stared openly, hungry for more. Alexander's empire was built on reputation, on fear. And tonight, with just a few sentences, I was tugging at the foundation. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. "You don't know what you're walking into," he snarled. I didn't flinch. I leaned forward, my voice a whisper but sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Oh, Alexander. I know exactly what I'm walking into. And you're not ready for it." For the first time all night his control slipped. His mask cracked. And I knew I had him exactly where I wanted him. Because empires don't fall to armies. They fall to a single whisper carried in the right room. The echo of his hand striking the table lingered like thunder. Crystal glasses trembled, silverware rattled against porcelain plates, and still, not one guest moved. 23 witnesses suspended in silence, waiting for the next blow. But the next blow would not come from him. It would come from me. I pushed back my chair slowly, the scrape of wood against marble cutting through the tension like a blade. Every pair of eyes followed me as I rose. My legs shook under the weight of the moment, but I steadied it. I let my gaze sweep the table, lingering on each polished face, each false smile, before finally landing back on Alexander Holt. "You think you've humiliated me tonight?" I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. "No. You've humiliated yourself." Gasps. Murmurs. One guest audibly sucked in a breath. Alexander's nostrils flared. His jaw clenched. "Sit down." "No," I said simply. For a heartbeat I saw the disbelief in his eyes. No one told Alexander Holt, no. Not in boardrooms. Not in courtrooms. Not in his own home. But I just had. And I wasn't finished. Flashbacks roared inside me like wildfire. Every time I was turned away from an interview because of the neighborhood I came from. Every date who laughed at my cheap shoes. Every landlord who sneered at my borrowed furniture. All of it coalesced into this moment. I leaned forward slightly, my hands gripping the back of my chair, and spoke not just to Alexander but to everyone in that room. You've spent your life building walls with money, convincing yourselves you're untouchable. But walls don't make you powerful. They make you prisoners of your own arrogance. And tonight, you've all seen exactly who Alexander Holt is without his empire propping him up. Just a bitter old man lashing out at a woman who refuses to bow. The senator's wife set down her fork. The venture capitalist leaned forward. The air was no longer suffocating, it was electric. Because now the whispers at the table weren't about me. They were about him. And Alexander knew it. His face reddened, veins pulsing in his temple. He opened his mouth, but for the first time in his life, he had no words. I gave him a smile, slow and deliberate, and whispered the promise I knew he'd never forget. This is the night your empire begins to crack. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. I could feel it vibrating in the crystal, in the marble beneath my heels, in the shallow breaths of 23 people who suddenly weren't sure whose side they were on. Alexander sat rigid, his wine glass trembling in his hand. For a man who had built empires, crushed rivals, and owned senators like poker chips, this was the first time I'd seen him cornered. And I wasn't done. I turned my head slowly, deliberately toward Daniel. His face was pale, caught between horror and awe. He had said nothing. Not one word to shield me. And in his silence, I heard every truth I needed to know. You didn't defend me, I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the air. Not once. And yet you expected me to fight for a seat at this table? Gasps rippled again. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. He lowered his gaze, shame burning through him. And I knew then, my war wasn't only with Alexander. It was with every man who had mistaken my silence for weakness. A flash of memory ripped through me. My first job out of college. Answering phones in a law office, smiling through condescension. My boss had once said, "You're too pretty to last here. You'll end up married to money." That's what they all thought. That's what Alexander thought now. But they were wrong. I didn't need their wealth. I had something far sharper. The truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, raising my chin, my voice steady and clear, you just witnessed the man you all pretend to respect. This is how he treats someone who dared to love his son. If this is how he speaks in front of you, imagine how he behaves in the shadows. The room stirred. Uneasy. Eyes darted. Reputations were currency here, and I had just set fire to his. Alexander slammed his glass down, shattering it. Wine bled across the white linen like blood. Enough, he roared, the mask of civility finally tearing away. But it was too late. The empire was already cracking. And everyone at that table knew it. The stem of the shattered glass rolled toward me, leaving a streak of red wine across the linen like a warning. But I didn't flinch. All eyes were on Alexander now. His mask was gone, his fury exposed. He was no longer the untouchable billionaire. They all saw the man behind the empire, raw and raging. And they were judging him. Daniel finally rose to his feet, his chair screeching back. Dad, stop. You're humiliating yourself. The words landed like a hammer. A son defending me would have been powerful, but a son calling out him? That was catastrophic. Alexander's head snapped toward Daniel, betrayal etched into his face. You ungrateful. But Daniel cut him off, his voice trembling but strong. She doesn't deserve this. Not from you. Not from anyone. For a flicker of a second I almost felt something for him. Relief, maybe gratitude. But it came too late. His silence earlier had carved a canyon I couldn't cross. I stood taller, letting the chandelier's glow catch the silk of my dress, no longer borrowed but claimed. I don't need your validation, Daniel, I said quietly, my voice carrying. You had a chance to stand with me when it mattered. You chose silence. That tells me everything. The table erupted in whispers. Eyes darted between us. Guests leaned closer to one another, the gossip already taking shape. Alexander's empire wasn't just cracking, it was unraveling thread by thread, right here in his own dining hall. Flashback. I was 22, holding down 2 jobs, too exhausted to sleep. I told myself, endure now, peace will come later. But tonight I realized peace never comes to those who wait for permission. Peace is seized. Alexander's voice broke, hoarse and venomous. Get out. He wanted to banish me, erase me like he erased anyone who didn't play by his rules. But he didn't understand. I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in power. I looked around the table one final time, meeting every pair of eyes. The silence bent toward me now, not him. I placed my napkin gently on the plate, straightened my shoulders and smiled. Then I whispered the words that would follow him long after tonight. Empires don't end with a bang. They collapse when the world finally sees the cracks. The room felt like the aftermath of an earthquake, still, brittle, waiting for the aftershock. Alexander's chest heaved, his hands clenched, but the damage was done. His own guests had seen him lose control, seen his empire bleed pride onto the tablecloth. And they would never forget it. I walked slowly toward the exit, every click of my heels echoing like a gavel. Daniel reached for my arm, desperation in his voice. Madeline, please, we can fix this. I paused, turning to him, my eyes steady. No, Daniel. You can live under his shadow. I won't. The color drained from his face. His silence had cost him everything. I left the mansion with nothing but my dignity, and that was more than his billions could buy. In the weeks that followed, whispers from that night spread like wildfire. Board members questioned Alexander's judgment. Partners pulled back. Politicians who once courted his favor distanced themselves. All because 23 guests had witnessed a man undone by his own arrogance. Me. I built something new. Not on borrowed dresses or borrowed names, but on truth. My own company. My own future. Every time I stood in front of investors, every time someone asked where I found the courage, I smiled. Because the answer was simple. Courage is born the moment humiliation no longer terrifies you. The night I walked out of that mansion, rain poured over the city like a cleansing storm. Each drop felt like it was washing away the shame Alexander had tried to stamp onto my skin. My dress clung to me, ruined, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from humiliation. I was walking straight through it, burning it behind me. The days that followed were quieter, but no less powerful. Whispers from the dinner table spread faster than I could have imagined. 23 people had witnessed a billionaire lose his grip, and gossip is a currency sharper than gold. Within a week, articles surfaced questioning Alexander Holt's reputation. Rumors of his temper, his ruthless business dealings, and his crumbling influence began to swirl. And Daniel? He called. Again and again. His voice cracked with apologies, with promises that things could be different. But I'd learned the most painful truth of all. Silence in your moment of need is the loudest betrayal. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I poured my energy into myself. The startup idea I had shelved for years, because I was too busy working for others, too afraid to risk failing, finally came alive. I built it from the ground up, one sleepless night at a time. And the same people who had once dismissed me as street trash, now lined up to invest. Not because I was flawless. Not because I was polished. But because I had survived the fire, and survival makes you fearless. There were moments when doubt tried to creep back in. Memories of Alexander's sneer, of Daniel's silence, of the laughter I had endured for years. But each scar reminded me of something different now. Resilience. I began mentoring women like me. Those who were told they weren't enough, who were humiliated in rooms where they dared to stand tall. I told them what I had learned that night, that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't wealth or connections or privilege. It's truth spoken without fear. The Holt empire didn't collapse overnight, but cracks widened into canyons. Deals slipped. Allies abandoned him. And the man who once sneered at me across a dining table couldn't stop the whispers that spread from that night. As for me, I learned the kind of power no one can take away. Because real freedom isn't borrowed. It's claimed. Have you ever faced betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. My revenge was freedom forever.